Hello, and welcome to Electrifying Growth, a podcast brought to you by Edison Partners. I'm Chris Sugden, the managing partner here at Edison and your host. There are moments in a person or company's journey that are undeniably electric. The spark or sparks, if you will, that propel you or your company to new heights. With Electrifying Growth, we're here to have in-depth, real conversations with great leaders who have been there and done it before. Edison has been investing in high-growth technology companies for more than 35 years, and I have been here at Edison doing this investing piece for more than 20 years. We've led over 225 investments. We understand that it takes great leaders and visionaries to build market leaders. We are your support system, a CEO and management's entourage, if you will. Let's introduce this episode's guest.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, you're listening to a rerun of one of our most insightful episodes featuring Shane Kim, founder of Baleon Capital. Shane's experience in growth equity and his journey through various market cycles offer valuable lessons that are just as relevant now, if not more so. Whether you're interested in the nuances of building a firm, the intersection of fintech and healthcare, or understanding the power of great leadership, this conversation offers timeless wisdom.
Welcome to our latest edition of Electrifying Growth. I'm your host, Chris Sugden. Today, I'm really happy to welcome a guest that has been on the investing side of the table for over 20 years. For those listeners who've been with us for a while, you know we generally have operators, CEOs, entrepreneurs, but Shane Kim is sort of all of those. He's actually the co-founder of a brand new firm, or pretty new firm, called Baleon Capital, which he co-founded. And Baleon's investments are similar to Edison's in that they're growth equity a little bit earlier stage than the ones we invest in here at Edison Partners. Shane and his co-founders started their investment careers in the late 90s. So they've got the fortune of have worked directly with pioneers in the earliest private equity funds. They began their relationship through a co-investment almost 2 decades ago. Over the years, they found common ground on investment philosophy, focusing on maximizing growth for early stage companies. And together, they've executed over 50 investments across various market cycles. And we'll touch on the market cycles that Shane and I have both seen over our career. Baleon was established to create a platform that embodies their growth culture, brought together a dedicated team to collaborate with exceptional founders, fostering the development of outstanding companies. Shane began his career at Camden Capital, where he rose from analyst to managing partner, which is quite a feat in our business over almost 20 years. And as you know from Shane, he's a deep domain expert in fintech, healthcare, and he's investing actually in fintech and payments for almost 2 decades. So before fintech was cool, we'll also touch on kind of convergence of healthcare, AI, and fintech. And as I call this episode Better Lucky Than Good, we'll talk about the good fortune to sometimes take, along with great hard work and great founding teams. So really welcome Shane Kim to the show and look forward to speaking to him. Shane Kim, welcome to Electrifying Growth. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Chris.
And also congrats on the success of Baleon. We'll talk about your firm that you started a little while, but as importantly, we're recording this. It'll probably be a little bit of time between this day and when it gets produced, but some fun news on the wire that we shared now, a mutual investment in a company called FingerCheck, which we can talk a bit about your love for payroll and HR as well. But thanks for joining the show. I'd love to start with just background, how you got here. I know your investing career has been a long one. It's almost like were you born to be on the buy side from birth? But just talk about your career arc and some of how you kind of got to founding your firm today.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here and talking with you. Yeah. It's probably a little bit of luck. I think a lot of people in their arc of their career, it takes a little bit to figure out what you really should be doing. There's no way I knew that I was going to be good at what I started doing, but I joined a firm in 1999 called Camden Partners, was a growth equity firm. I was the lowest rung of the ladder. I was an analyst, and I remember fondling what that was like. But I eventually became one of the managing partners, and we invested 5 different private equity funds over the years. I started working with earlier stage companies strictly as an advisor, which brought me a lot of appreciation of what that means in terms of having so much at risk day to day and how you get things done. And then, in the last couple of years, I started a new fund called Baleon Capital and backing early growth stage businesses now.
So was it the stage or just an itch to start your own firm, so to speak, that was kind of the aha moment for starting Baleon?
Yeah, I think it was. I had a great career, grew up inside of a nice organization. And at 39 at the time, I just wanted to own everything that I was doing going forward. I wanted to be all in. I just figured I had a great place to start my career with great mentorship around me. But it was at that point, I'm like, I think I've figured out how the next 40 years might go. I stopped earning a paycheck at that point, and I guess I'm an entrepreneur from that standpoint of let's go figure out the next thing.
Yeah, I was actually key on that entrepreneur, but your career and mine are in some ways similar. I got in this business a little later than you, done a couple startups, but I don't think you ever expect to be in this business when you're younger this whole time. It's sort of, it finds you. And there are kids now, I say kids, young people now who are, I'm going to be in private equity. I'm like, I don't know how you know that, but good for you. Similar kind of thing, you sort of took a job, or did you always did you know you were an investor, or was it like, I'm just going to learn from people around me and see where it goes?
No, I think it was just a job in the beginning. And I was just hoping that someone would think that whatever I said was interesting or was value add to the equation. And what I find sort of humorous now as being usually the older guy in the room, so it's a little bit shocking for me. I still take this approach that I might be wrong. So as I offer advice, I warn people that don't do what I tell you to, what I suggest. Let's knock it around a little bit, because I do come from this perspective, like I don't really know everything. And that certainly was the case when I was 22 or 23 years old, right? I was he's like, should we think about this way? They're like, oh, that was a pretty good answer or a pretty good question. Now it comes with a little bit more gravitas, I suppose. But I'm like, whoa, don't take that and run just yet. Let's not run.
The problem with being, having the gray hair and experience, there is an ability for the people to think, well, he must know something.
Yeah. And it's sometimes we do, and a lot of times we're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as you just said, you are an entrepreneur, which makes it even easier to be credible investing in companies. But, I think first time fund, raising capital, recruiting a team, you do need some infrastructure. Your LPs want you to report to them. And it looks a lot easier from the outside. Outside, it looks easier than it is on the inside. And it's sort of like, I think outsiders think people give you a bag of money and you just go around making investments. Just talk about all the little things that now you can appreciate that a firm had that you didn't know.
Well, that's the thing. It's all the little things that lead to big things. And if you try to go and bite off the big goal that you want, you'll never close that big deal, or you'll never close that LP. So anytime you're building something, you need to surround yourself with people that actually do things and actually execute. Talk is really cheap. And so, I think I learned that early days, because when I joined that first fund back at Camden, they were only between fund one and fund two. There wasn't a ton of infrastructure, but we had to do all the little things. And all those little things added up to 5 different funds. And having raised this fund at Baleon, I think the people that we surround ourselves with, it's all foundational stuff. Yeah, but there were a lot of sleepless nights, working hard into the night to create the allure that all the infrastructure was in fact in place, that it took a little time to sort of actually put in place. But it's rewarding. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. So harder than you expected, what you expected to get that first fund done and be off and running, making investments?
Yeah, it's hard. I live with a bit of paranoia that once you find a really good deal or a great company, the day after it closes, I'm like, I don't know that we can find another one, right? Will there be another one? So I always think that it's almost coming to an end. But every market that we've been around for a little bit, I don't know that I've been around a market that's like good. Like it's always a challenge. Like every fund we ever raised was a battle. In getting people to trust what you're doing is a very difficult sort of bridge to cross with anyone. I don't know. I just keep my head down, just keep going. You can't get too high, can't get too low. You just have to just show up every day and be who you are. And usually that works out.
So at the risk of, to our listeners, sounding like maybe I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, but when I met you a few months ago with this context of this FingerCheck deal and you haven't been on the board, I immediately realized that you're kind of a humble, as you said earlier, take what I'm telling you with a grain of salt. But to your point, raising funds, I've found the same thing. We've raised about 6 funds here through my tenure at Edison. And I see some firms that can do it easily and other firms that just kind of keep chopping the wood. I wonder if is humble not the recipe for raising capital? Just all gravitas, right? I'll just go.
Yeah, baby. I guess I just haven't figured it out. I don't know how to turn that on. I just try to be myself for the most part. Because at the end of the day, investment returns and the performance of the company is the thing that matters the most. And so, maybe I'll never be great at, raising capital per se. But if we do our day-to-day job, everything usually works out pretty well.
So I think people like to talk to deal people, and sometimes I think deal is the wrong word because these are companies and these are people's babies, and I know you feel strongly about that as well. But we got to talk investments and talk these babies, and I think someone like yourself who's been in the business a long time, and me too. I think we all have our favorite deals, but they're not always our best deals. And I guess I'm curious, maybe it is, maybe your favorite deal that you can remember over the 20 plus years is your best return. But love to hear your favorite. I mean, name or not, your choice, but why it's your favorite. And then if it's not the same as your best, maybe the best one too.
Well, sometimes the best ones, they work for reasons that, success has like many fathers. Sometimes when it works right out of the gate, you actually don't know really what worked. It happens that way. But when things get a little bumpy, you know why they got bumpy and what you had to address. And so I think some of the more rewarding journeys, I'd say, that I've had have been the ones that had success, but they had some turbulence or some trying times along the way.
It works straight up and to the right, as people like to say.
Yeah. And so, yeah, not to get into like too many details, but, I started actively writing checks with my name on the signature line in 2007. And so by the end of 2008, from a vintage standpoint, I picked the wrong year to start this, but we had to get through it. And, you had to run to the fire. You had to solve, and very quickly. So the people that in those companies that persevered, they all did work. We all made money on those companies that we invested, even in 2007. They all survived. They all persevered. And so as a result, you do know the quality of the men and women that you worked alongside because they were in the same foxhole with you, trying to figure it out. And I think that's what I find is the most rewarding thing is all of this is about relationships, and a lot of what you'll do in the forward perspective, who you will work with in the future, who will be your investors, who will be your future board members. A lot of them will be those people that you've been through some challenges with, and you know how they're going to manage through it. Whether the deal was super successful, not successful, but like I can trust this person and I know how they'll, sort of get through the challenges of business and life. That's a big deal.
Well, it's funny because I think that is the difference between growth and venture, if you will, are these founders who have kind of done it without money. So the good news is when bad times come, the good founders, I'd say, know kind of what to do because they've kind of been there without lots of resources. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah. Oh, a ton of respect for founders. And you almost don't need to give them too much advice because other than encouragement, because they'll usually figure it out very, very quickly. I think in larger companies, sometimes you're a little bit disconnected to like the concept of making payroll or chasing that invoice. But in the smaller businesses where the founders are bootstrapped, they're very close to it. A lot of times they're the CFO and the CEO wearing multiple hats. They know how to get through it.
That's why we like these kind of businesses. So earlier, I said it here, but I also said it in the opening that we've got to know you, myself, and also our For Medicine through this mutual now investment called FingerCheck. And I thought what was interesting is you were recruited to the board of FingerCheck, as I understand the story. Love to hear you talk about it a little bit. Not as much as an investor. You were sort of, hey, I'm forming a board and I kind of need some help. Would love to hear more about that. To get to know the company. I also, quite frankly, it kind of combining two of my thoughts with one, which is Joel Cohn, the founder, and your relationship is sort of one of those that to me is the example for what founders and board members relationship should be. The bond I've seen, the trust I've seen in the last several months of getting to know you and the company and Joel, it's admirable because like I thought you guys knew each other for like 10 years watching this interaction. So just again, I know you talk a lot about how much respect you have. I think empathy and humility and listening are all part of that. I'm sure you'll mention, but just talk about kind of that journey because I think it was important though what the board did here to help Joel get into a position to complete a transaction like the one we completed and to keep growing the business as well.
Sure. So I think when you look at it, obviously in hindsight, it looks perfect. Well designed. This was the plan all along. And in a lot of ways it was, but I think the serendipity of it was there was an existing relationship with Joel's family in the same space. It was a very successful company. And I think where we hit it off as we kind of reflect on like what really worked was a bit of empathy, truly empathy in terms of where he was and not really having prior experience in any larger company or any company really at that point. He literally was doing this for the first time. And we run into that a lot. And I think you run into that a lot. And sometimes there's a bit of reticence or lack of comfort with working with private equity. What does that mean? Or venture capital, where these professional investors, you read about it,
Right. Are they really going to be my partner? Are they gonna...
Right. And look, and some founders romanticize what that's supposed to be, and other people are scared. It's a little bit, and I put, Joel in more the category of like, I don't know, like it's grooming versus a true partnership. So I think our relationship was around helping break down those barriers a little bit, because what we worked on a lot was professionalizing how to approach things, which at first seemed extremely daunting from his perspective.
Like almost like you're boxing them in, right?
But he ended up deploying many of those disciplines that you would say, and I would say, are best practices. But initially, when you say best practices, whoa, that's like you're creating bureaucracy. What it did was it created a system to communicate with everyone in the company in a measured fashion. And what it did was it actually increased the quality of the communication and lowered the amount of interaction. It created some time, actually. And
what sounds like at first a suck of time became a...
Yeah, it's like everyone likes a system eventually, and if you're consistent about it, people then know, okay, well, like, Chris is a communicator via email, so I'm going to email Chris, or I'm going to call him on the phone because I know understanding all that is really important. And so it was just a lot of little things. And we built a lot of trust over time, and we talk almost every day. Very short communication, but he's turned into a great friend, and I certainly consider him an advisor to me. But it's a great relationship where my goal is for him to rise, succeed. We want the business to do better. That means sometimes you have to take a step forward. Sometimes you have to take a step sideways. Sometimes you have to take a step back. It's all about getting an orchestra right to play a certain type of music together, and that's why we're really excited about working with Edison. And you don't go into these processes knowing exactly where you end up, but if I had to pick, it really was a perfect situation.
You have the same approach. I think we're really lucky to be in this business, and I say that we as in our firm, me personally, I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, people give us the trust of their money, but even more importantly, these founders give us the trust of whether you're in a controlling position or in a partnership position. I actually think control on the cap table is way overblown. At least at the end of the day, the management teams who make stuff happen, to be blunt. But I think at the end of the day, these management teams, these founders, giving us trust in working with them and partner with them and their baby is like no greater responsibility. So we're really lucky to be in this business. As you think about your own kind of board journey, 20 plus years, it's funny that you said when you're the young person at the table, they expect you to say stuff and not sure they even need to listen to you. Now I hate to say the old person because I share your own, like, where did time go perspective. But so now there's this view of, wow, that experience must come with, it's got to be right. Better board, I'm sure you're a way better board member now than you were when you first started. Is it just experience? Other things? How do you think about your own board journey as you kind of being a board member? Because there's no real training manual. People give you kind of some ideas, but.
Something that comes to mind very quickly is that in the beginning part of your career, you spend a lot of time with the other professionals in your firm, and you learn a lot, and you borrow their stories and you apply them in the boardroom, as analogies of things that can go wrong and go right. Now, these are my direct stories. I don't have to borrow. I have intimate knowledge of what actually happened. And so I'm telling from a first person perspective. And yeah, I had to use lore of, past folktales or, of other companies that have succeeded or had challenges. Now it's numerous journeys, numerous cycles, right? So whether it be the dot-com rise, the crash, 9/11, great GFC era, you have bubbles in 2020, COVID era. I mean, we've seen a lot.
Numerous issues, right? Things that you do wonder. I'll go back to Joel for 1 second. I'll go back to boards as sort of two quick follow-ups on this topic. But I was having a conversation with one of our quote-unquote younger guys. He's going to start leading investments himself. It was literally just in the last day or so. And I realized, again, training manuals, like we think we're a firm with infrastructure, got a lot of people, but I realized these little things that we all learned along the way, you don't necessarily write them all down. And I was giving have you had the conversation with the CEO about you wear a CEO cap on this conversation, and now you're going to wear a founder shareholder hat on this conversation. You're going to be a board member. These two very specific roles that are very, very different at times. I'm sure you had this conversation with Joel. Your ownership is one thing, and that's what's going to make you wealthy. How you run your day-to-day life and your job is another. How have you kind of developed that conversation over time, and how do you think about that topic when you're talking to founders who, as the business grows, they may or may not be the CEO. They may put their CEO in front of their shareholding. How have you done with that over time?
It's definitely the more delicate transition. The idea that, especially for founders, it is a single identity, you as a person, the company, and a lot of times just the cap table too. And so it's very hard to like separate it, but they are actually all distinct items: leadership, the company itself, and providing a different type of relationship with everyone in the room. I don't know if this helps answer, but like what I've always taken to home from, someone that brought this up to me from one of my mentors was the role of being the CEO, whether you're the founder or you hired into the role. Many times it's a very lonely position.
That's a saying I use all the time. Lonely at the top, right?
Yeah, because how do you call, Shane or Chris, who might be your largest investor, and say, hey, I've got a problem with this. You're like, whoa, you don't have the answer to that problem yet?
Vulnerability.
Right, it's vulnerability, yeah. And how do they go to their direct reports and say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out, right? So they've got a lot of personal time. I think founders live that all the time.
Every second.
And so they've got higher skill set on that. But I try to take that into the board setting and know that there's a vulnerability about that. And I think for the founder on the board, also with the, maybe now a CEO and then thinking more specifically about it, the FingerCheck is like, you need to understand these relationships and see it. And then you'll understand the other people around you. And it's not so, you have to think about from that perspective too, because the relationship between Joel and Dan in that case is like, he knows everything. It's like, no, he doesn't really know everything. So you guys have to work together, right? And do it in a communicative, open, confident, candid way.
Everyone's got the best intent way as well, right? Yeah, and you've been on a number of boards, and I want to double click on the board kind of dynamic. We like to say boards should be strategic weapons. Like they shouldn't just be, I heard this from another person, so I've stolen it. Oversight, hindsight, insight are all sort of dynamics of what the board should do. But we've also seen these bad boards. If you're in this business 20 years, you see a board that just for whatever reason, one person spoils the bunch, or just bad fit, whatever it is. Good board hygiene and things you've seen done that make boards more successful than others, and maybe a bad one. Back to best practice, not as much best practice, but here's what I've seen that causes things to go off the rails. Call it more from a board perspective than you as an individual board member.
It's basically not being aligned on what is the most important thing at that moment. I agree with you. Like there's times where running through the financials and what is happening on a minute level is sometimes very important. And there are other times where once everyone is aligned and understands how the business is operating, and if that is fine, then maybe we need to spend more time working on strategy. And that, there's companies that spend so much time on strategy and like, hey, you're on the day-to-day, it's really not happening. Like we need to spend more time. So it's that macro, micro sort of the lens going in and out. I know it's difficult, but I think that is probably the biggest challenge for, think about all the boards, is to go in and out of that without losing perspective on what is really important. But you just can't get hung up on one thing,
How have you, as a firm, or you personally, your view of lead director, chairperson, different than the CEO? We know small businesses, the CEO sort of takes for granted, if you will, that they're the lead, the chairperson. At the same time, talking about not being equipped for that job, right? If you've got multiple investors at the table. So I'm kind of curious, how have you thought of that? And probably even, has that evolved your own thinking over time as you've spent more time in the business, as they say?
Well, I think of boards, I think of working with people all the same way, which is I am selling all the time, not for a commercial contract, but it's a two-way thing, right? So my fellow board member or fellow investor, they're trying to get me to see something from their perspective or see it in my own eyes. And that is the challenge for me too, with respect to other people around the table, executives, is how to articulate and communicate what it is that I'm seeing and try to get them to see it in their own eyes, what I'm seeing too. Because it's very hard for me to tell people what to do. And first of all, they won't listen anyways, right? So you have to get them to the point where they say, oh, I see what the issue is. Let me go work on that together. And right. And that's, I think, part of building that community on that board is for everyone to communicate clearly enough so that they understand what each person's perspective is. And it's never perfect. And there's always a little bit of friction. But if we can think about the company as an entity and where it needs to go, and we're all a part of that, then you realize you have an oar in the boat per se. And sometimes you need to pick your oar up out of the water and let Chris row right now, right?
Good. It's a good analogy. It's interesting because when people ask me this question, the most common breakdown is because there's a presumption that you're coming from your own bias, whether it's your firm bias, whether it's your CEO founder bias. Another thing that just happened on another deal is biasing, rather than just being sort of, here's what's really worrying me. Everyone's assuming what the comment's coming from. And it's just to get people to be transparent on why they're bringing the comment up. A lot of times that sort of context of, here's why I'm bringing this topic up, not because I've got this agenda. I tend to see people assume their agendas much sooner than there may even be. And that becomes its own snowball effect, if you will. If we change our topic to, so we're both investors and we're living through the age of AI, like right now, I'm just curious, are we overhyped, underhyped, about right? And kind of, as you see AI, where do you think it's got investable traction in your world right now?
Well, it's being utilized certainly in a lot of business different ways. I use history to guide me a little bit here. So I think of, at least, I don't know if we're out of this initial phase, but it reminds me a little bit of the dot-com era. Anyone could put up a website. Anyone can use a large language model. Everyone can use AI. But what are you actually going to use it for to create value, right? And so I think the dot-com, they quickly, I don't know how long it took, but it took some time to realize, oh, software as a service. Let's deliver, we could use websites and cloud computing to deliver a different experience. When in the beginning it was like, let's just take whatever's on paper and put it up on a website, but it was basically the same thing, right? And I think AI will initially go after the manual tasks that exist in our settings. And so it'll pretty much be the most mundane things. And that's where we'll get this immediate lift, I think. Are we headed to generative AI and the machines are sort of taking over? I still think human intelligence and empathy play a huge role. Maybe they'll figure that out, but I think we're years away from that. I also think because of that, the human interaction of a phone call, of a personal touch is going to mean that much more, because I think the AI is going to cheapen some of the digital communications, because you can eventually tell, or you just know when you're physically in front of someone, you're like, now you're going to value that interaction.
I can't agree with you more. We sort of just lived it, right? COVID and remote work. Everyone in the last kind of year or year and a half or two, I've gotten to a point where everyone wants to have at least one in-person board meeting. Frankly, I'm in favor of all, but this sort of need for human interaction, even the most introverted people are realizing there's a benefit to that, which kind of tells you something about, to your point, how far the machines are going to go. I get you can take it way out, I guess, crazy land of sci-fi kind of talk, but I sort of share with you empathy, salesmanship, convincing others that come along. All that stuff is not going to be replaced by, speaking or typing commands into a...
Yeah. Leadership is a human dynamic and a human skill.
Well said. So without spilling any of your own really secret sauce, is there something you think has kind of more near-term interest, whether it's industry more broadly, rather than giving not trying to steal your best ideas there at Baleon, but I'm kind of curious, is there something that you're kind of leaning into, either as a firm or personally, with respect to AI, or even generally, forget about AI, here's a space we're kind of interested in, we think is going to be interesting?
We're heavy investors around the healthcare setting. There's still a ton of manual processes. It's a function of every organization trying to own it. And as a result, it creates a lot of walls. And so most of what I get excited about are some of our companies that have really, in a lot of ways, brought in a human. For some of it's like clinical intelligence, but that's the human nature of it. So the idea of bringing clinical dialogue to what seems very transactional, I just see a lot of value in that. And it isn't a black box. And so what I found in healthcare is that AI probably won't get there quickly, because understanding a decision and not knowing, if you tell it it's a black box, that's not the decision they're looking for. They want to talk to a person. They want to know that it's based on science.
Right. Someone thought through it.
And that algorithm, which is an algorithm, is really important for the patient to ultimately then follow an instruction. But if we do use Google too much, I think, for healthcare, but that's why you got to get to a nurse or to a human very quickly.
I think it's well said. We agree that healthcare is still so manual. To your point, there are fiefdoms or controlling sort of entities, and the bureaucracy of it all. It's a long runway. And I, frankly, even a decade ago, I thought it would follow the financial services, where a transaction is the way a patient interacts with a hospital or an insurance company would follow the financial services space, which is really fast and efficient. A decade later, it's still
the same.
And yet that creates opportunity. To kind of bring this to, a conclusion, and your insights are, and I think for the audience, you can see why I'm really looking forward to working with you as a board member. Because I think, you've been through the ups and downs, and we know our advice isn't always right. But I guess the way I look at this last question, I like to ask as many people as I can this question. Second Startup was a magazine business, and not sure that's the best business, but anyway, it was a publishing company. And we had this column called When I Was 25. It was targeted at young people anyway. So get guys like us, but even famous people, to write a sort of an article about when they're 25. So it's not what I do wrong or what I do different. It's more like, if I knew then what I know now. So as you look back on the 25-year-old Shane, you kind of talking to a younger audience listener, what little pearls of wisdom would you say, boy, if I only knew then what I know now?
I would have taken more risks. I think I was a careful student of
the game.
Yeah. And I would probably have trusted my instincts more. My instincts were right.
More than they were wrong, is what you're saying.
More than I was wrong. And I'm saying that now with some data points, but I do remember very early on in my career that a senior partner who had been around had told me, you're going to come to a point in time in your career where you're going to realize you know as much as everyone else in the room. Because I was still learning, right? And so I had that bias that there's just more to learn than to lead or anything like that. And I didn't want to stick my neck out. And he's like, you'll come to a point you realize, and he's like, you're not there yet. And I said, yeah, of course. I think I got there fast, but I didn't have the confidence to, trust it. And so I've carried that almost like part of my personality now. I think it's like, so there was a period of time where I think I've kind of pushed forward. Now that I get a little bit older, it's good for us to actually not do that so much, because it comes across in a different way. So, and I want to stay young and youthful. And I know that that's the future, really is. So
that's a great one, because actually I'm reflecting the same conversation I referred to earlier. How do you make sure our younger teams are the ones who are going to make our firms successful when you think about it, and lasting? And they don't want to make a mistake. And I actually find, maybe it's growth equity more than venture. I don't know, but there's a nervousness of taking too much risk by most, frankly, young people. And we actually have this epidemic of risk taking by even, there's data now that high school kids don't take risks, as we did in high school. But I think it's a really interesting thought here to how do you give the folks, who are in their late 20s, 30s, enough rope to run, and maybe you pull on it now and then to save them from themselves. But it's really interesting, because that same advice needs to translate to those young people.
There is another thing that in the financial crisis, the founding partner told me to go back in, go take risks. Let me worry about managing the firm per se, from a systemic basis or whatever. Your job is to go take risk. And he wasn't saying go do something crazy, but just go find the next thing that we need to do, right? And that's your job. I'll handle the other job. And I don't know if that works 100% of the time.
It's a great reflection, because how do we, I think about my own kids and I think about my young professionals. How do you give them enough to feel confident that you've got just as much instinct but also knowledge as I do, because you're on the front lines. Right?
Yeah. And you mean it too. You mean it when you tell them that.
Yeah, I don't mean it. Go screw up, and then I'm gonna tell you did something wrong. No, I'm actually saying, yeah, go. Well, Shane, you've been a tremendous guest. I really appreciate all the insights. 20 plus years of investing. Your humility, your empathy just comes through. I'm really looking forward to working with you on our shared investment now called FingerCheck. And if you're up for it, I kind of think about a year from now, we'll do a Joel Cohn, the founder, Dan Kaysen, our new CEO, you and me as board members, and do a retrospective because the professional is always get a big punch, but no one ever tells you, so how'd it go? Now, of course, that's a big bet if it doesn't go well, but let's bet on it going well. But I really appreciate joining for us for another episode of Electrifying Growth, and stay tuned for that follow-up episode with Shane Kim down the road. Thank you. Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners Network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.